The Blood Calendar Part 2. Chapter 13, The Forbidden Chamber. Even in a city that worshipped silence, the lung of the world was not spoken of. It was neither temple nor tomb. It had no ceremonial path, no rituals carved in its walls, no glyph to mark its entrance. Most priests believed it was a myth, some founding chamber buried beneath the city's first altar. Itzel had always believed it, too. Until Eclipse led him to it. They walked beneath the Temple of Breath, into a passage sealed not with mortar, but with tongueless masks. Dozens lined the walls, their mouths carved closed, their eyes open and horrified. Itzel slowed as they passed. "These are offerings," he whispered. "Not statues." Eclipse traced a glyph across one of the mask's brows. The stone pulsed. The eyes blinked. The passage opened. The tunnel narrowed. The air grew thin, humid, like it had not been touched by breath in centuries. Eclipse moved ahead, torch in hand. At the end of the corridor was a round stone sealed by a handprint, smaller than Itzel's. A child's. Beneath it was a glyph he had never seen in any temple. A spiral of lungs exhaling flame. "What is this place?" Itzel asked. Eclipse simply signed one word. "Truth." The door slid open with a sigh of dust and fire. Inside, the chamber expanded into a perfect sphere, smooth stone walls lined with carved vents that hummed faintly, like a heartbeat. In the center floated a stone ring, levitating, spinning slowly in the air. It was carved on every surface with glyphs. Some glowed gold. Some pulsed red. Some were blackened, dead. But one was missing entirely. A broken piece at the edge of the ring, shattered and gone. "This is the red calendar," Itzel said. "No," he corrected himself. "This is the original. The template all the others were copied from." Eclipse stepped forward and removed a small obsidian shard from his satchel. He fitted into the broken edge. The ring clicked once. And began to breathe. The chamber filled with light and wind. The walls lit with images, not drawn, but moving, as if memory itself had stained the air. Cities burning under eclipses. Temples rising, then falling, then rising again. Children lifted toward altars. Time looping in fire and blood. And one figure stood in the center of them all. Itzel. In different faces. Different robes. Different lives. Always kneeling. Always being carved. "I was the offering," he whispered. "Every time. Because I knew too much. Or because I refused to forget." A low hum filled the room. The ring's glyphs rearranged themselves, and a new one appeared at its center. A name. Not Itzel's. Ixkin's. "No," he breathed. "Not her. Not again." As the ring slowed, one panel on the wall shifted open, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, a scroll. Wrapped in red silk. Bound in silver thread. Itzel took it with reverent hands and unrolled it on the chamber floor. Inside were not glyphs, but instructions. "The ritual of unbinding," he said aloud. "The one they never taught us. This is how we end the cycle." Eclipse looked at him, eyes wide. And then the ring flashed. And every glyph inside it went dark. A voice filled the chamber, low, fractured, ancient. It didn't speak in words, but in sensation. A warning. A denial. A choice that had not yet been made. "It knows we found it," Itzel whispered. "And it will hurry now." Eclipse raised his hand. The glyph on his skin, once flickering, now burned. It was the seventh seal. And it had just been claimed. Chapter 14, The City Beneath the Glyphs. There are cities we inherit. There are cities we build. And there are cities we bury, because remembering them would burn too deeply. This was the third kind. And it was breathing again. It began with a fissure. After the ritual fire at the Temple of Sight consumed its second priest, the western courtyard cracked open. A priest fell through, screaming as he vanished into blackness. 3 hours later, Itzel stood at the edge of the same fracture, staring down into the rift with torchlight flickering against the walls. "There's structure beneath," he said. "These aren't natural caves." "Then how did no one know?" Ixkin asked, tightening her grip on the obsidian dagger still bearing her father's glyph. "Because the city above was built to hide the one below." Eclipse touched the edge of the stone and nodded once. "It is time," he signed. The passage beneath was steep and spiraling. Walls slick with condensation, etched in strange glyphs, twisted forms that looked like they had once meant something holy but had been rewritten by memory, or madness. And they pulsed. Like veins. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, not with wind, but with abandonment. They emerged into a corridor. Massive. Silent. Lit not by torches but by faintly glowing glyph stones embedded into the walls, veins of light snaking across the ceiling like constellations rediscovering themselves. "We're walking through history," Itzel whispered. "No," Ixkin corrected. "We're walking through a lie." The corridor led to a central plaza, circular, grand, and eerie. At its center stood a sunken pool of obsidian, filled not with water but with shimmering ash. Around it rose 13 stone thrones. None bore names. Each throne had a glyph above it, each one a red seal. But none were carved. They were branded into the stone, as if scorched by fire older than flame. Behind the thrones, walls of pictographs told a story in reverse. A world unmade. Cities rising backward. Blood returning to veins. Stars swallowing light. At the final panel, a single figure raised a calendar ring above their head. And was consumed. "This was the original council," Itzel murmured. "The ones who made the first cycle." "Why?" Ixkin asked, voice hoarse. "Why would they do this?" "To trap something," Eclipse signed. "To delay, not destroy." Itzel moved toward the obsidian pool. When he knelt beside it, his reflection didn't return. Instead, he saw the child again, Toka, Ixkin's cousin, standing alone on an altar, glyphs swirling across his chest. "It's trying to claim him," Itzel whispered. "No," Ixkin said. "Not him. It wants someone pure. Someone untouched by memory, or guilt." She turned to Itzel. "It wants someone unlike us." Eclipse placed both palms on the stone circle at the pool's edge. A shudder passed through the floor. The ash began to spin. From the center rose a pedestal, and on it, a small, cracked mask. Half serpent. Half child. "This is the mask of the origin," Itzel said, stunned. "It's not a symbol. It's a control glyph." "A key?" Ixkin asked. "Worse. A trigger." The moment he touched it, the ash erupted. Visions engulfed them. The city faded, and they stood now in the same chamber, but before its burial. It was alive. Priests and scholars moved through the space, laying glyphs in calculated spirals. At the center stood a queen, tall, cloaked in burning red. Itzel recognized her face. It was Ixkin's. But colder. Younger. And she spoke. "Time must not consume us. Let it consume itself. Let blood bind the edge of the blade. Let memory forget, until only the fire remembers." The chamber dimmed. A ring of children stepped forward. 13. each holding a fragment of the original calendar. They placed them on the altar. And vanished. The vision ended. The ash settled. Only silence remained. Ixkin looked down. A new glyph had formed on her hand, burned into her skin by ash and memory. Not a seal. A command. It chose me, she whispered. Then we change what it means, Itzel said. No, she replied. We change what I mean to it. Chapter 15, The Ritual Begins Again. The eclipse arrived 4 days too early. It was not a whisper in the sky but a declaration, a great black mouth swallowing the sun mid-ceremony, casting Chak'Kanul into premature shadow. The torches along the palace walls roared to life, unnatural and gold. Bells rang from the temple of the sky. But not in warning. In invitation. In the grand plaza, 1,000 citizens stood beneath the eclipse's shadow. Priests in white and crimson filled the altar stairs. Their headdresses, twisted coils of serpent feather and jaguar bone, glinted under the dying light. At the top stood High Priest Eclipse, arms wide, voice booming. The gods demand remembrance. The sun bleeds to remind us, time is sacred. And to preserve the world, we offer blood. The crowd, half entranced, half terrified, fell silent. A young servant, barely a man, was brought forward. He bore no mark. He had not been chosen. But the cycle did not care. Eclipse stood in the crowd's edge, still as stone. Hidden in the folds of his tunic was the cracked mask of the origin. In his hand, a tiny obsidian dagger with glyphs that pulsed faintly beneath the eclipse. He did not move yet. He was waiting for one sign. Itzel watched from the colonnade above the plaza. He could feel the change in the air. A pressure, not physical, but temporal. Time itself had shifted. Moments were starting to echo. People blinked twice and forgot what they were thinking. A child looked up and aged a year in her mother's arms. The red cycle isn't just restarting, he muttered. It's folding. Beside him, Ixkin tightened her grip on the ceremonial staff once held by her father, the staff of the Ajah, inlaid with gold and firestones. We can't stop the ritual, she said. But we can stop the lie. How? We give them truth. Now. Ixkin stepped onto the temple's upper platform. The crowd turned as the eclipse deepened. Her cloak billowed in the wind. Gold paint smeared her jaw, ritual flames marked her hands. People of Chak'Kanul, she shouted. You have been taught fear in place of truth. They tell you the gods demand blood, they do not. The priests speak of prophecy, they follow a prison. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eyes turned upward. Eclipse's voice snapped like a blade. You dare speak above the eclipse? Blasphemy. No, Ixkin said. Memory. The high priest raised his obsidian blade. This offering cannot be interrupted. Then take me instead, she said. Gasps. Even Itzel froze. Eclipse's eyes widened. You want to feed the cycle? Ixkin shouted. Feed it with truth. I am the 13th flame. I have seen the city beneath the glyphs. I have walked in the bones of your lie. Tzib hesitated. Just a second. And in that second, Itzel moved. He raised the obsidian staff in his hand and slammed it against the temple stone. The sound rippled, sharp, unnatural. A glyph appeared in the sky. A burning spiral, half-formed, hovered above the altar. The high priest faltered. The servant staggered. Blood dripped from his wrist, not from a cut, but from a seal forming on its own. No, Itzel growled. Not again. He leapt from the steps, pushed past a dozen priests, and reached the boy. Eclipse met him at the base. Together, they pressed palms to the altar. And with a shared glyph, one not of binding, but of refusal, they broke the seal mid-formation. The boy gasped. The eclipse stuttered. For one breath, light returned to the sky. The fire in the braziers turned blue. And the mask of the origin cracked in Tsekel's hands, revealing beneath it a shard of stone carved not with a glyph, but a name. Ixkin. From the broken altar, a stream of red ash burst upward, spiraling into the air like blood turned into breath. It formed a ring in the sky. Itzel looked up and whispered, hoarsely. 7 seals are broken. 6 remain. Ixkin stepped forward, defiant. Not if we burn the mask. She lifted the staff. The sun flared once through the broken eclipse. And the people began to remember. Chapter 16, The Star-Drowned Map. It began with a question. What happened the first time? The red cycle was older than the current calendar, older than Chak'Kanul, older than the masks the priesthood wore. Itzel knew this now. But what he didn't know, what had haunted him since the broken ritual, was why it began at all. And more terrifyingly, who started it? Beneath the palace, past the lung of the world, the ancient city beneath Chak'Kanul waited in darkness. Itzel, Ixkin, and Tsekel returned by torchlight. The air was thicker now, as if even the walls were holding their breath. The thrones of the nameless emperors remained silent. The ash pool glowed faintly. But one corridor, once sealed behind a glyph of a serpent devouring a comet, was now open. It led down. Deep. Beneath even memory. The corridor ended in a dome, a low, circular chamber lined in mirror-polished black stone. No carvings. No bones. Just a single raised platform. And at its center, a basin of still water. Above it, the ceiling had collapsed. Through the gap, the night sky shone down, and the stars inside the chamber began to shimmer. They weren't reflections. They were glyphs. Etched into the stone with such precision, Itzel could feel their weight behind his eyes. Tsekel stepped forward first. He raised a shard of memory stone and placed it on the edge of the basin. It pulsed. Glyphs rose from the water, forming an intricate spiral. Not a calendar. Not a prophecy. A map, one older than any codex Itzel had ever studied. What is this? Ixkin asked. Itzel stared. The sky. As it appeared before the first eclipse. The glyphs moved, orbiting one another. Some turned black. Others burst red. One glyph, one made of 3 nested spirals, began to pulse violently. This one, Itzel murmured. This is the moment. What moment? The point where time fractured. The glyph labeled it simply, 8 cabin 3 pop. The same date found etched in the spine of the Obsidian Codex. The same one repeated on the ring. The date not of a beginning, but a division. A choice. They weren't trying to survive the gods, Itzel said slowly. They were trying to survive themselves. The original priesthood, 13 in number, discovered a celestial event. A convergence that would have reset the calendar, realigned time. But they feared it. Because it meant change. So they wrote a prison. A cycle that would loop back to the moment just before the change. They chose repetition over transformation. They sacrificed progress for control. And every time we near that convergence again, Itzel said, the cycle restarts. But why the blood? Ixkin asked. Because memory doesn't give itself willingly. It has to be taken. Tsekel pointed upward. Through the broken ceiling, a new star had appeared. It pulsed red-blue, unnatural, moving slowly across the sky like a scar that refused to heal. Itzel stared. And his blood ran cold. That's not a star. It's the mark of the convergence. The original moment is coming again. This time, the cycle can't repeat. Behind the basin, etched into the floor, lay a faded carving barely visible under the dust. Itzel knelt, cleared it with his sleeve, and read aloud. The blood is not for the gods. The blood is for the memory. And the memory is the key. A final glyph formed on the basin's surface, one shaped like an open eye inside a sun. It burned red. And settled in the space of the eighth seal. We're not just unlocking the cycle, Itzel whispered. We're waking it. Ixkin touched his arm. Then we need to be ready when it opens its eyes. Chapter 17, The Betrayal of Chak'Kanul. Loyalty is not forged in silence. It's tested in fire. And on the edge of rebellion, when the city still reeled from a broken ritual and the second eclipse faded from the sky, Chak'Kanul made his choice. And it wasn't them. Itzel and Ixkin met in secret that evening inside the sacred library behind the Temple of Breath. Eclipse stood guard outside, his hand resting on the cracked mask of the origin, now wrapped in cloth and sealed with red thread. The scrolls they had taken from the forbidden chamber were spread across the floor, fragments of the original red calendar, maps of forgotten cities, and the glyph scroll detailing the ritual of unbinding. If we can perform this ritual before the final eclipse, Itzel said, we may shatter the cycle for good. And if we fail? Ixkin asked. Then it will consume more than blood. It will consume possibility. A rustle came from the courtyard. Footsteps. Tense. Familiar. Chak'Kanul entered, dressed not in armor, but in priest-guard ceremonial robes, white trimmed with obsidian scales. His face was unreadable. You called for me, he said. We found the truth, Ixkin replied. Your loyalty has always been to the crown, then hear what your jaw died knowing. Itzel stepped forward, holding out the ritual of unbinding. This is not treason. It is survival. The red cycle has enslaved us for centuries. You were a soldier once, Ixkin said. You fought to protect the memory of this city. Now we ask you to protect the truth. Chak'Kanul took the scroll. Held it. Read it. And closed his eyes. You're right, he said softly. But I can't let you do this. Itzel stepped back. What? Chak'Kanul's hand moved with soldier's precision, too fast for thought. The scroll dropped. His dagger was out. Eclipse lunged from the shadows, but the blade was already at Itzel's throat. I begged you, Chak'Kanul said, to stop chasing shadows. But you kept digging. You kept remembering. The city is fragile. Our people are frightened. The priesthood may be corrupt, but they are order. If the cycle breaks without guidance, we don't become free, we become dust. Ixkin raised her father's staff, fury in her eyes. You would betray me, she said. You stood beside my father. You vowed to protect me. And I will, Chak'Kanul said, voice heavy. By stopping this. He's chosen the cycle, Itzel said bitterly. Not because he believes it, but because he's afraid of time without it. Eclipse moved first. No words. Just action. He struck Chak'Kanul's shoulder with the butt of the dagger. The blade fell. Itzel pulled away, clutching a shallow cut on his neck. The room erupted in chaos, scrolls scattering, the cracked mask tumbling across the stone. Chak'Kanul wrestled Eclipse to the ground. And as they struggled, his hand slipped into his robe. And came back holding a small obsidian seal. The eighth glyph. I won't let the city fall, he snarled. Not for dreams. Not for broken stars. Then let it rise. Ixkin shouted, and struck him with the staff. The seal shattered in his hand. And a burst of red light engulfed the room. When the light faded, Chak'Kanul lay still. The glyph had burned across his chest, not in anger, but in recognition. A man who chose survival over truth. A protector who became a warden. The eighth seal had chosen. And it had been loyalty. Eclipse sat in silence beside the body. Itzel closed Chak'Kanul's eyes and said no words. Ixkin stared out the window, where the eclipse had left the sky dark long after the sun had returned. He wasn't wrong, she said. If we don't end this carefully, we won't become free. We'll become forgotten. Then we burn the cycle, Itzel said, and remember everything. Chapter 18, The Memory Glyph. The night after Chak'Kanul's betrayal was silent. Not the peace of healing, but the silence of pressure building behind stone. Outside, the city of Chak'Kanul stirred in uneasy rhythms. Flames burned longer in the temples. Priests moved in pairs. Whispers followed the name of Ixkin, spoken now as a spark, half hope, half heretic. Inside the old observatory chamber, Itzel sat shirtless on the cold stone floor. A bowl of salt water and crushed bark steamed beside him. His skin was marked with red paint and ash. Across from him, Eclipse held a bone needle and a shard of obsidian ink. Are you certain? Ixkin asked from the doorway. No, Itzel said. But the cycle is. And it keeps choosing me. If I'm to end it, I have to know why. The glyph of memory was not taught. It was not carved into temples. It existed in silence, in oral fragments, visions, myth. Eclipse had carried it burned into his chest since before he could remember. But now, he would pass it to Itzel, in the only way it could survive. Through blood. The glyph resembled a jaguar's eye, split into three. Eclipse dipped the needle in ink, then ash. Itzel gritted his teeth. And the carving began. Each line burned. Not like flame, but like meaning. The needle didn't just cut flesh, it pulled at something deeper. Thoughts. Names. Echoes. As the final stroke curved beneath his collarbone, the world tipped. And memory came roaring back. He stood now in a chamber not unlike the lung of the world, but brighter. Unfinished. Stars wheeled above. 13 figures knelt around a circle of children. Itzel was one of them, young, strong, unscarred. A scholar. A skeptic. A dreamer. And he was the one who first said, "If time can break, then we must build a cage to catch its shards." They listened. He led them. And when the first eclipse came, he marked the stone. The red cycle began. And he became the first to be consumed by it. Another vision. He walked through fire as temples fell behind him. The glyphs failed. The seals broke. He carried the child marked as the 13th flame, her name forgotten, but her face familiar. Ixkin. He placed her on the altar. But the gods did not take her. They took him. He wandered alone. A city gone to ash. A people vanished. Time collapsed in on itself. The sun rose in reverse. His skin cracked with glyphs he could not read. And still, the cycle turned. Itzel gasped, breath returning like water crashing into drowning lungs. He was back in the observatory. Sweat covered his body. The glyph on his chest glowed faintly, then darkened into scar. Eclipse stepped back. His eyes, always calm, now burned. Ixkin knelt beside him. "What did you see?" "I was the architect," he rasped. "Not of the temples. Not even of the calendar. I built the red cycle." He rose shakily to his feet. It wasn't a prophecy. It was my answer to entropy. To fear. We feared the end so much, we chose to trap time. We carved the same days into stone. Made memory bleed. Made forgetting sacred. And now? Ixkin asked. Now the only way forward is through me. He held out the ritual of unbinding. The 13th seal isn't a glyph. It's a choice. Someone has to remember everything, and burn for it. Sekal offered him the obsidian dagger. Itzel took it. Not with fear. But with fury. No more masks. No more flames. We finish what I began. Chapter 19, The Ember Crown. In the days of the first Ajahs, kings ruled by fire. Not swords. Not blood. Memory. They bore the ember crown, an obsidian circlet set with 13 stones, each representing a known cycle of time. It was said that the crown burned the truth into the skull of the one who wore it. That no lie could be spoken once it settled over the brow. And so, it was sealed away. Buried under the Temple of Names. Until tonight. The Temple of Names had been silent for years. No new glyphs were added. No names spoken. Only forgotten echoes whispered in its corridors. But that night, Ixkin stood at its gates with a torch in one hand and the staff of her father in the other. Sekal followed beside her, silent. Itzel, still recovering from the carving of the memory glyph, stood further back, marked, changed, and already beginning to feel the weight of forgotten lives pressing against his ribs like a second heartbeat. Guards blocked their path. Loyalists. Young priests trained by fear. You cannot enter, one barked. Only the high priest may. I am the daughter of Kawil, Ixkin said. Blood of the last Ajah. You are no longer sanctioned. Then let the god strike me where I stand. Lightning cracked behind her. And the guards stepped aside. Deep beneath the altar chamber, Ixkin entered the crypt where her father once wept over forbidden scrolls. There, resting atop a blackened throne, was the ember crown. Its stones still glowed faintly, dim embers buried under ash. But as she approached, the torches dimmed. And the crown began to burn again. A voice, not a sound, but a sensation, pressed against her mind. Will you remember what was forgotten? Will you carry what was buried? Will you burn without lying? She did not kneel. She raised the crown with both hands and set it upon her head. And the world caught fire. Visions assaulted her. Her father whispering in fear beside the red calendar. Children vanishing during the old eclipse. The first queen, her face identical to Ixkin's, offering herself to the gods, only to be refused. The cycle did not accept self-sacrifice. It only took what it chose. And now, it had chosen again. When Ixkin emerged from the Temple of Names, the crowd had already gathered in the square. Word had spread, she had claimed the crown. Torchlight flickered across stone. Priests lined the outer wall, uncertain. Itzel stepped forward, still unsteady but upright, glyphs burning on his skin like coals that refused to dim. Ixkin stood atop the old dais and raised her voice. The cycle is not prophecy, it is punishment. And those who wear the masks have punished us long enough. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sekal unwrapped the mask of the origin and held it high. No more thrones carved of fear, Ixkin said. No more silence passed as truth. I will not be your ruler. I will be your reminder. And the crowd knelt, not in obedience, but in reverence. For the first time in centuries, the ember crown did not mark a ruler. It marked a witness. High Priest Halak Tzib emerged from the Temple of Sky. He bore no mask. Just a blade. You desecrate the rite, he said. No, Itzel replied, stepping forward. We rewrite it. Tzib looked between them, face carved from stone. Then may the final seal judge you both. And with that, he vanished into the shadows, back to the chamber where the 13th flame was always meant to be lit. Ixkin turned to Itzel. We have 6 days. 6 days until what? Until the real eclipse, she said, her voice distant. The one that isn't made of shadows, but memory. Itzel looked to the sky. The stars were shifting again. And the red calendar spun silently in the deep places of the world. Waiting. Chapter 20, The Hollow Flame. The temple of the first flame was not marked on any map. It was not spoken of in stories. It had no surviving rites, no remembered name, only a direction, whispered by a dying priest long ago, west of memory, south of truth. And so Itzel went alone. Because some paths, once remembered, can only be walked by one. The jungle was quiet as he rode, the only sound the whisper of leaves and the rasp of wind over old stones. No animal calls. No drums. Even the stars above seemed cautious. Eclipse had tried to follow. But the glyphs on Itzel's skin, now 12 in number, repelled him. They marked him as a vessel. And vessels must go alone to the altar. Itzel's journey ended at dawn on the 4th day. Before him rose a ruin, not a temple, but the ghost of one. The pillars were melted. The altar had no top, only scorched bone. And in the center stood a flame that did not move. It was hollow, a shape of fire made of nothing. It pulsed faintly, though no heat came from it. This was not fire. This was memory refusing to leave. Itzel stepped forward. The 12th glyph on his chest pulsed. And then it stopped. Because the final seal was here. Not carved. Not glowing. Not broken. But waiting. He knelt before the hollow flame. And then the wind changed. A voice rose from the hollow fire, not in words, but in breath. Familiar. Terrible. And then a shape formed inside it. It was himself. Not as he was now, but younger, proud, furious. Itzel stepped back. What is this? The piece you left behind, the voice said. The part of you that refused to break. The one who built the cycle, and would not repent it. The younger Itzel stepped out of the flame. Eyes glowing red. Skin covered in unclaimed glyphs. And he smiled. You think ending the cycle will set them free? It will devour them. We protected them, you and I. We gave them time in a bottle. Over and over again. No, Itzel whispered. We gave them fear. We gave them peace. We gave them chains. The younger self drew a blade of red flame. Only one of us walks away. I didn't come to fight, Itzel said. I came to remember. Then remember this. The blade struck. But Itzel didn't dodge. He let it cut his chest, where the final seal waited. And as it carved through him, the glyph ignited. Not with pain. But with light. The glyph of the unburned flame, a spiral of memory with no center, seared itself into his skin. The younger version screamed, flickered. And shattered like ash. The hollow flame collapsed. And the temple groaned. Itzel stood alone once more. But now he remembered everything. Every failure. Every seal. Every time he said, let it turn again. And now, finally, he said. Let it end. The jungle behind him began to shift. The stars above changed direction. The time loops were breaking. And in the dirt, where once stood a fire with no heat, there now lay a black stone, shaped like an eye closed in sleep. Itzel took it, wrapped it, and walked toward the rising sun. Chapter 21, The River of Returning Names. There is a place in the jungle where the water never stills. A river that glows faintly under moonlight. Not from reflection, but from memory. Long ago, the priests called it Zakba, the stream of forgetting. It was where names were washed away. Where condemned bloodlines were unspoken. Where glyphs were erased from skin and soul alike. Now, it would serve another purpose. To give the stolen names back. Ixkin walked first. Cloaked in obsidian feathers, the ember crown on her brow now glowing faintly gold, she stepped barefoot along the jungle path as the people followed behind her, quiet, uncertain, but watching. No guards. No fanfare. Just villagers. Mothers. Elders. Children who had never seen the river and those who'd only heard it whispered in bedtime threats. And above them, the sky trembled. Not with fear. With light. Eclipse walked beside her, holding a staff carved with the broken pieces of the original red calendar. Its glyphs had shifted. Rearranged. The 12th and 13th seals were now mirrored, no longer spiraling inward, but outward. What happens now? Ixkin asked. We let them see, Eclipse signed. And then, we let them choose. When they reached the riverbank, the water shimmered with strands of silver and blood red. The ancient priesthood once stood here with blades of bone, washing the condemned names from memory. The glyphs carved into the stones were still visible, only now, they glowed backward. Names were returning. Ixkin raised her voice, not in command, but in invitation. This is the river that stole your names, she said. This is where your ancestors were turned into whispers. This is where the cycle buried your truth. She turned to the crowd. Now, we walk into it, not to forget, but to remember. One by one, the people stepped into the shallows. Some with tears. Some with names scrawled on parchment or stone. Some carrying bones. And as they moved, the river began to speak. The water shimmered and coiled around their ankles, around their chests, around their hearts. Glyphs rose from the surface, faint, glowing, dancing across the air like fireflies. Itzel's name. Kawile's name. Even Ixkin's, in forms she didn't recognize. Names once buried. Now reborn. An old woman stood beside the riverbank, staring into the water. She reached in with trembling hands and pulled out a mask, her husband's. Long ago, he had been erased for speaking against a priest. She pressed the mask to her chest and whispered. You lived. And the glyph on the mask reappeared. At the river's bend, Itzel stood watching. The memory glyph on his chest pulsed with every name returned. And in his hand he held the black stone from the temple of the hollow flame, now warm, now alive. It's working, he said quietly. The seals are unraveling. The cycle is weakening. Ixkin stepped beside him. Not weakening, she said. Letting go. As the sun began to rise and the river pulsed with light, Ixkin stood on the edge of the current and raised the ember crown in both hands. You've remembered, she told the people. Now choose. Do we bind time again, and keep what we know? Or do we let it burn, and walk into something we've never seen? No one spoke. But one by one, they knelt. Not in worship. In willingness. From deep in the crowd, a boy stepped forward. Toka. Ixkin's cousin's son. Once marked by the cycle. He held up a glyph stone, his own name, faded and cracked. It glowed briefly. Then split into two. One glyph meant offering. He chose the latter. And the river carried his choice downstream. Chapter 22, the eye that closed. In the heart of the oldest temple, beneath stone that remembered more than gods, the eye of the calendar opened. Not a physical eye. Not a carving. But a presence. A space that had not existed until memory itself rewound and reformed the world. And now, it had one final question. Who will stay behind? Itzel returned from the river of returning names with the 13th seal pulsing beneath his skin. The black stone, once dormant, was now lit from within, not with fire, but with movement. Every name ever taken. Every seal ever formed. Every cycle now untwisting itself across the fabric of time. But like any tightly wound cord, it could not unravel without a final point of tension. A fixed anchor. One person had to stay. Not alive. Not dead. But in memory, forever bound to the eye. Beneath the observatory dome, now repurposed as the sanctuary of final choice, the 13 marked ones gathered. Some still lived. Others stood only in echo, reflections born from memory, each bearing one of the seals. 1. The whispered blood. 2. The flame that devours. 3. The spiral mouth. 4. The serpent eclipsed. 5. The cracked sun. 6. The jagged name. 7. The eye of smoke. 8. Loyalty unremembered. 9. The mirror star. 10. The forgotten root. 11. The hollow flame. 12. The seed of repetition. 13. The flame that refuses. Only one would remain behind to hold the eye shut. Ixkin stood with her hand over the ember crown. The eye is not evil, she said. It simply remembers everything. But for the cycle to end, someone must carry what no one else will. Eclipse nodded and stepped forward. I was born from memory, he signed. I have no place in a world that forgets. I will stay. Itzel placed a hand on his shoulder. You've carried too much already. He stepped forward. I made the cycle. I built the prison. I forged the seals. Let me be the door that finally closes. As they spoke, the central altar ignited, not with fire, but with light drawn backward. Glyphs rose from the floor, circling upward like breath turned to wind. At their center, the eye of the calendar formed, a spiral with no end, no beginning. It watched them all. And then, it spoke, not in words, but fate. It marked one name. On the floor. On the stone. On the soul. Itzel. Ixkin stepped forward, eyes filled with fire and sorrow. You don't have to. I do, Itzel said. Because I already did. Every time. This time, I choose it. Eclipse offered him the final fragment of the calendar ring. Itzel placed it into the center of the eye. And the glyphs stopped spinning. The light folded in. The eye closed. And with it, the cycle. Ixkin stepped from the temple into a sky that no longer bled. For the first time in generations, the stars stayed where they belonged. No flicker. No spiral. Just forward. The ember crown dimmed on her brow. The people waited. And she spoke the final rite. Let memory be the seed. Let fire be the breath. Let time move, not return. And beneath the temple, deep in the sealed chamber, a single name burned softly into obsidian. Itzel. Not as prisoner. But as witness. Chapter 23, The City Without a Cycle. The first morning came slowly. Not with trumpets. Not with fire. But with birdsong. Birds that had not returned to the city in generations. They nested now along the cornices of broken temples. They sang from the rooftops where masks once watched. They flew beneath a sky that no longer bled. And beneath them, the city of Chak'Kanul exhaled. Itzel was gone. The chamber beneath the eye had been sealed, not with stone, but with silence. His name, etched into obsidian, glowed gently in the deepest corner of the temple of breath. Not worshipped. Not feared. Simply honored. Eclipse had vanished with the morning mist. Some said he walked into the jungle to return to the memory that birthed him. Others believed he never truly existed, that he was memory made flesh, and now that memory was whole, he had no form left to hold. But Ixkin remained. She stood on the balcony of her father's former palace, no longer adorned in robes or paint. The ember crown still rested on her brow, but its fire had cooled, its glow now faint and steady. It no longer burned truth into her. It simply reminded her to listen. The council chamber had been reopened, not to priests, but to the people. Artists sat beside astronomers. Farmers beside scribes. Elders who remembered the old tongue. Children who had never known a day not shaped by glyphs. Together, they debated the shape of tomorrow. And Ixkin listened. "Should we keep the calendar?" one asked. "Yes," said another. "But not in blood." "What of the thrones?" asked a third. "The old hierarchies?" Ixkin stood then. Her voice carried not like a queen, but like a flame recently blown out, still warm. "We remember our past," she said, "not to return to it, but to plant it. Like a seed. We are not beginning again. We are beginning forward." In the weeks that followed, the Temple of Sight became a school of glyph lore, where children were taught how to write not to repeat, but to create. The river of returning names was lined with prayer stones, where the people could carve names once stolen, and send them floating home. The mask hall was converted into a sanctuary of silence. The masks were not destroyed. They were placed on altars as reminders of what forgetting can do. And the red calendar, now broken, was melted into 13 separate rings. Each was given to a different family. Passed down. Not to enforce order, but to mark resilience. The people begged her to stay in power. But power was not her desire. She called herself not a jaw, but Tz'Anilan, the listener who remembers. Her duties were simple. To walk the city each morning before the sun. To speak the names of the dead into the wind. To ask a child, each day, "What do you dream of building?" And record it. In a new book. The Book of Firsts. On the eve of the spring rains, Ixkin sat in the upper gardens where her father once watched eclipses alone. A soft wind moved through the torches. The stars above shimmered, but did not spiral. And in the torchlight, a flicker passed beside her. Not a shadow. A presence. She turned. There was no one there. But a single whisper passed through the air. "You remembered." She closed her eyes and smiled. "So did you." Chapter 24, The Architect's Dream. There was no sky where he now dwelled. Only a dome of shifting stars that pulsed like thoughts, too vast to hold, too ancient to name. Beneath them, a floor of unbroken stone stretched to the horizon, etched with glyphs that rearranged themselves each time he blinked. This was not the after. This was not the beyond. This was the memory between. And Itzel was its architect. He no longer hungered. No longer bled. And yet, he still thought. Still felt. He could remember every life he had ever lived, not just the ones the cycle permitted, but those lost in its machinery. A stargazer beneath the first eclipse. A fire priest who burned himself to preserve a lie. A boy who once erased a child's name and never forgave himself. A father who forgot his child's birthday for the last time. Each life a brick. Each name a glyph. Each sorrow, a thread. But in this realm, no thread unraveled. Here, memory spoke. From the edge of vision came a figure, tall, draped in robes not of fabric but of written wind. His face was Itzel's. Younger. Brighter. Unscarred. The version that built. You bound time once, the figure said. You carved fire into fate and called it protection. I did, Itzel replied. And now it is unbound. It is. So why are you still here? Itzel looked around. At the glyphs rippling through the floor. At the fragments of cycles long shattered. He touched the center of his chest, where the 13th seal had once burned. It was gone. Replaced now by something simpler. A spiral, with no center. Because memory isn't just for building, he said quietly. It's for letting others write for themselves. The younger self nodded. And faded. A new space opened before him, a library built not of walls but of floating scrolls and hanging stories, each one glowing faintly. He reached for one. It bore Ixkin's name. Not as flame. Not as heir. But as listener. He smiled. He touched another, marked with Tzekel's glyph, but blank inside. A living story still walking. He pressed a palm to the scroll and let it pass through him. And then, a choice appeared. A tool materialized in his hand. Not a chisel. Not a pen. Not even a voice. A question. Will you write again? In the distance, a new horizon opened. A place where time had no edge. Where nothing repeated. Where stories were built not to contain, but to explore. He stared into it. And whispered. Not yet. Instead, he turned back to the stories of those who still walked. And began to record. Not to control. But to remember. Beneath the stars that moved only forward, Itzel finally understood. The world didn't need more architects. It needed witnesses. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can build is a place for others to write their own names. Chapter 25, The Fire That Walks Forward. There are no more prophecies. No more eclipse maps etched in blood. No more names chosen in secret. No more children whispered into sacrifice. And yet, the people still gather. Still light their fires. Still speak their stories into the wind. Because now, fire is not what binds them. Fire is what frees them. One full cycle had passed since the eye was closed. But no one called it a year. Not yet. The old measurements were gone, and new ones had yet to settle. Time now flowed like the river, without stone banks, without red seals, without flame-born thrones. But still, the city of Chak'Kanul thrived. Its people walked differently, lighter, as if weight had been peeled from their skin. The memory schools were open-air courts, where no child was tested on memorization, only asked to tell the truest version of a tale. The garden of glyphs had bloomed where the temple of fire once stood. Every petal bore a scratched symbol. Every flower a phrase. And the stars above held their course. No spiral. No loop. Only forward. She no longer wore the ember crown. It now rested in the hall of listening, unlocked, unguarded. Anyone could wear it. But few did. Most only touched it. Most only needed to remember it existed. Ixkin's days were filled with walks, through the newly rebuilt plazas, into homes where glyphs had once been forbidden, now painted on walls by choice, by joy. She kept no court. She heard no petitions. Instead, she sat each morning at a carved stone bench beneath the ceiba tree and waited. And listened. Sometimes a widow came and spoke her husband's name aloud. Sometimes a child brought her a new story and begged to know if it was true. Sometimes silence itself came, and she honored that, too. One afternoon, a young girl no older than 7 arrived barefoot, her tunic dusty from a long journey. She had no name carved into a stone, no offering in her hand. Just a single question. Do we still need fire? Ixkin smiled. That depends, she said. Do you want to see in the dark? The girl nodded. Ixkin reached into her satchel and drew out a small clay bowl, filled with ash, herbs, and resin. She lit it. The flame flickered blue. This one doesn't bind anything, Ixkin said. It just helps you find your way. That night, hundreds gathered in the open amphitheater, once the priest's tribunal, now known as the Circle of Flame Walkers. There were no roles. No assigned speakers. Anyone who had something to tell was given the stage. A mother recited a dream. A child sang of a jaguar with a broken tail. An old man stood up and admitted he once erased someone's name, and asked for it back. No one jeered. No one punished. Eclipse was not there. But his staff stood in the center of the circle, draped in flowers and feathers. And as the moon rose, silver, steady, unflinching, someone stepped forward to read from the Book of Firsts. Near the end of the night, a young priest in training read a final entry. First person to walk a cycle without repeating it. Itzel. Marked not by flame, but by choice. Gasps. Then silence. Then a ripple of whispers. And at the back of the amphitheater, a gust of wind blew through the trees. And in the flames of the central brazier, a single spiral flickered, brief, bright, not binding. Just remembering. The people went to sleep that night not afraid of dreams, but curious about them. They no longer prayed for the gods to remember them. They remembered each other. They told stories. They carved names. And they walked forward, not with fear, not with flame, but with a fire they could carry. And choose when to set down.
Every story has an ending, but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.